Hey, we're going to be continuing on a study. I'm super excited for this evening to talk more about the subject of marriage. I know for some of us, this hasn't been as exciting of a study. I've had feedback from several people who've just said it's actually very painful to be studying this subject because it feels like a Band-Aid being ripped off, or even worse, a scab being picked. There's a wound there, and so having conversation about what are the ideals of marriage can just feel like getting beat up all over again. Just feels like here's what I didn't get, here's what I didn't enjoy, here's what it could have been, but it didn't happen. And I just want to say I'm so sorry. And that's not what God wants you to go through. He doesn't want you to feel like, as we discuss marriage, it's just, opportunity for more pain and more regret. Certainly his hope and my hope is that this can actually bring some measure of healing. Now, how does that work? I just pray. I pray that the Holy Spirit does that. Jesus said that you'll know the truth and it will set you free. And sometimes the truth, as we say, does hurt, but it can also be like a salve. It can be something that brings comfort. Because when we don't know what we were shooting for and it all just went wrong, it can very easily leave us in a place of feeling like I'm just damaged goods. Or maybe God's ways don't really work. Maybe this whole marriage thing is just like phooey on it all. But it lands us in a place of bitterness or hopelessness, and none of that will really bring healing. And so, again, my hope and my prayer, although I can't guarantee that this will be the case, but my hope, my sincere hope and prayer is that as we discuss what is marriage, even if it's been something traumatic for you, that it will be a source of hope and of healing, because really as we study what marriage is about, as we discover what love is, which is what our topic will be for this evening, it's not contained just to marriage. Marriage, marriage is not the only place we express and receive love. It's just one tiny pocket. And in some marriages, actually love is like it's the last place we go for love, because there really is a brokenness there. But this description of love and anything that I would say about marriage ultimately is a reflection of God's heart for us. As we discussed months ago when we started this study, marriage is the primary metaphor that God uses in Scripture to help us understand the kind of relationship that He wants to have with us. And so the description of the ideals that we're believing for and working towards, if that's not your experience with a human, it can be your experience with God. That's what He wants. And it is difficult and it is painful because I'm speaking primarily of a relationship with a human. If that relationship has been so damaging and painful to you, it's hard, I acknowledge, to translate that into, okay, what does this mean for my relationship with God? That is a difficult position for you to be in. But I do want to invite you. I believe that that's what God would invite you to do, so that this can be healing rather than a source of further trauma. On that note, let's dive in to our description of love, because that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is what is love? What is love? And starting in I could open the Bible almost to any page and found this word, but we've been in Ephesians 5:25, which is where it says, "Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her." So what's this word love in the Bible? What does it mean? What are we getting at when we say love? The Bible uses a couple of different words for love, and some of you will be familiar with these concepts. Phileo, eros, and agape are the Greek words. There's actually another one, storge, but often storge doesn't actually show up in the Bible, but in the Greek there is another word. And in the Bible text, storge gets kind of lumped together with phileo. Sorry, that was more than you actually needed to know. The point is, let me take a moment just to describe these. Phileo is the kind of love that exists between people who share common interests. It's happening with the soccer team that I coach. The boys, we're like, hey, what's up? Yeah, high five, dude. Yeah, cool. It happens with the dads, especially because we share a little more in common even than I do with their sons, because we're dads, right? And they come to the practice, and sometimes at the end of the game, at the end of the practice, we scrimmage, and I have that kind of father bonding thing going on with the other dads. And yeah, it's so cool. And we haven't won a game yet, but I guarantee you our phileo will go up even more when we share in common a victory. right? That affection, that joy, that sense of, yeah, we're in it together, camaraderie, affection. Now, phileo is based on a shared experience, and it tends to fade after the soccer. I've not told the boys this. I've not said, now, boys, you know, the affection and the camaraderie we feel right now, it's going to fade when the soccer season is done. But I saw evidence of that because I coached one of the ringers on my team last year. He was on the other team. But I have spent more time with that boy than the other coach, so I tried this. Hey, Brendan, come on over to our side. I coached you longer than that guy. And he just laughed at me and said, no thanks. Why? Because too much time has passed. Does that make sense? Phileo is a condition based on my current circumstances. It's an affection that develops when I have this shared common experience. It's not a bad thing. Just because it's limited doesn't mean that it's this evil thing. May there be more phileo in the world. May we share more in common and enjoy those commonalities with the people around us. But it is very different than what we're ultimately aiming at as agape. Now, eros, that one's a pretty self-explanatory. Maybe it's the root word for erotic. We would talk about erotic love, and it's just the sexual thing that happens between people. No more explanation necessary, I think. And it is definitely dependent on current circumstances. Can we agree on that as well? Agape, quite different. Agape is what we would call unconditional love. That's probably the best short definition that I've heard of it. Unconditional love. It's saying no matter what, I'm going to love you. Now, what's interesting about agape is that inherent in the understanding of unconditional love is it's actually a promise about the future. We say it's unconditional because what we're saying is no matter what happens down the road, I'm going to keep loving you like I do right now. And so any promise, agape always has included in it a promise about how I will be down the road. Look at this verse in Hebrews 13:5. It doesn't actually include the word agape, but it is a description of agape. The writer of Hebrews says, make sure that your character is free from the love of money. Now, in the Greek, that word love of money is based on the root word for phileo. So he's saying, be sure that you're free from the phileo, this affection that we can have toward money that's based on our current circumstance, right? How I feel about money is less about the future than more about how do I feel right now based on what's in my bank account. It is free from the love of money, being content with what you have, for he himself has said, I will never desert you, nor will I ever forsake you. So we are free from this relationship with money that wants to steal our affections because we rest in the agape of God that says, I'm going to be there for you no matter what. So there is that promise of a future, and that agape love is what we all long for, and it's also what we long to give. And this is why love cards, love notes always will say things like, I will love you forever. They don't say, I will love you for now. It just doesn't have the same ring to it. It's got to have this statement of it's never going to change. And our hearts long for it. We just long for that sense of stability and confidence. This is not going away. Love, real love. Now we talk in English, I love chocolate ice cream. That's we wish our language would change. Okay, but whatever, it's not. I still say I love chocolate ice cream. I actually really love peanut butter and chocolate ice cream. That's where we're really talking about. And that might actually be agape because I think I will love it forever, unconditionally. But you know what I'm trying to say is this, the real love is something that calls for eternity. It's not made to end, and it's because God has really put that longing inside of our hearts. Now, again, just to reiterate, phileo and eros are based on current circumstances. It's an emotional response to what's currently happening in my circumstances. Agape is a promise about how I will be and who I will be in times down the road. Okay, so the question is, how can I be empowered to give this kind of agape love? If that's what I long to receive, of course, I want to be someone who gives it. So how can I be empowered to give agape love. The Bible says that really the best and only way to consistently and purely give agape love is to be someone who's receiving agape love. 1 John 4:19 says that we agape because he first loved us. And I get the picture, and I'll share this oftentimes in pre-marriage counseling, of the agape love that God wants to build between a couple is like an A-frame house. It's built on this kaboom, solid foundation of God's love. We've received his promise to never leave us, to never forsake us. It's solid. And we look to it as the source of stability for anything that we would ever offer. I'm not looking to my spouse to be the source of security for what I might say to them about how I will love them. I'm making my promises, not looking at my spouse. This is what I do at a wedding. You'll see this in Christian weddings. I've been to other kinds of weddings where this doesn't necessarily happen, but the pastor, the minister, will ask the couple to face him, and he'll ask them a question about how they will be in the sight of God. And they're not facing each other yet, making their vows to each other. It starts with, do you promise to love and keep her? And I forget exactly all of how it goes. I usually have it printed in my Bible. I'm cheating. But the vow is before God, to God, and the minister is standing in the place of God, if that makes sense. And so it's really built on the foundation of God's love and his empowerment, because I'm saying I am receiving agape because he's vowed to me. And so therefore, because I'm receiving from God, I'm now empowered to give agape to someone else. So the foundation, and then also, so we have God as our foundation, but we also have God as our future. We're looking ahead to God. We have the common goal. And so we're each not shooting. Our energies are not primarily directed toward one another. Our energies are primarily directed toward a common goal, to love and to serve God more fully. And so the closer I get to God, I actually end up becoming closer and closer to my spouse in the process. And that triangle really forms an incredibly strong, a strong structure, I guess you'd say, for a marriage. Now, let's shift topics a little bit and talk about love and how it's been defined in our culture through the years. 150 years ago, 200 years ago, if you talked about love in marriage, it would be viewed very differently than how we would think about love in marriage today. Love in marriage, traditionally, and there still are traditionalists who would say that love is primarily about a choice. I've heard this line before. And so the question I'm asking is, love, is it passion, which is more the modern take on it? It's this emotional, I'm just so in love. Or is it the traditional concept, love, maybe you've heard this before, I've actually heard sermons along this line, love isn't a feeling, it's a choice. And so my question is, which is it? Is it a feeling? Is it a passion? Or is it a choice? This idea that love is a choice, it's a duty, it's something you commit yourself to, was actually quite institutionalized in our culture, again, 150 and plus years ago. Marriage was not seen as a place for primarily or even sexual gratification. It wasn't about emotional needs being met or sexual needs being met. Actually, sex was taught that it was essentially really only to be engaged in for the purpose of procreation. And that came from that Stoic idea that we talked about last week. That was really the influence of Stoic Greek philosophy, because remember, who was the guy? Zeno, who taught on his stoa, right, his porch. He said to the Greeks of his time, hey, if you really want to be enlightened, if you really want to be wise, you need to avoid pleasure. Pleasure is the main distraction from true enlightenment. And then you had Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle all saying women are bad. So Greek philosophy says women are bad. That's Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Zeno and the Stoics say not only are women bad, but they're also, especially the pleasure associated with them, is the main distraction and temptation that will keep you from true enlightenment. And these philosophies heavily influenced and infiltrated the early church, because most of the early church fathers were educated in Greek philosophy before they became Christians. And it's kind of a crack up. One of the great ways that you can tell how influenced by Stoicism the church theology was. Again, rewind, and still to this day. I went this morning and read through the commentary on the book of the Song of Solomon, which, if there is an erotic book in the world, that's pretty high on the list. Guess what the one subject that Matthew Henry, who wrote his commentary 150 years ago, guess what was the one subject he never mentioned in his commentary on the book of Solomon? Sex. It never came up. He talked about how confusing the book is and how you have to work really hard to get the point, and how true enlightenment is something that all believers have to strive for, and how young readers shouldn't read this book. I mean, it was all over them, and I was just laughing out loud. My goodness, he can't see the obvious? This is a book about sex and how much joy can be shared within a marriage relationship. But this concept was very difficult for people a while back to really wrap their minds around. And so the primary theology for the book of Song of Solomon was to read it as an allegory for a relationship with God, which gets very difficult in some parts of that book. And so I think it certainly can be. Certainly, like I said, marriage relationship is the primary image that God uses, but I think he also really intends for marriage and for love to be an experience of incredibly passionate, real, deep, exciting, thrilling, emotional satisfaction. And I think that's what he ultimately wants to have with us as well, not obviously through sex, but through intimacy. And we'll talk more about how that develops in just a few moments. But anyway, the traditionalists say it's this duty, and you need to fulfill it, and that's all that really matters, because, all that emotional stuff, that's not really God. He'll take care of your emotions. Really what marriage is primarily a duty. Now, the modernist, of course, is exactly the opposite. They'll say, no, love, man, you got to be free to just flow with it. You got to go with it. And anything that you would put as a boundary, as a responsibility within this love thing is inherently repressive or even oppressive. It's going to restrict you. It's going to constrict you. It's going to rob from you the freedom to really experience what you're supposed to be able to experience in love. Had an experience with a woman a few years back who the guy she was with was interested in getting married, and we were having a series of conversations, and her statement was about marriage. Listen, I really love what I have with my boyfriend, and I don't want to ruin it. What she said first was, I don't need a piece of paper to validate the love that I have with my boyfriend. I don't need a piece of paper to validate this. And actually, to take it a step further, she said, I'm actually afraid that this piece of paper will threaten it. It might ruin the magic. This was her word. I'm afraid that the piece of paper might ruin the magic of what we're enjoying. And I just thought, wow. If that doesn't encapsulate the mentality, I don't know what does, because her definition of love is purely passion. There's no boundary, there's no duty, there's no responsibility, there's no choice. It's actually purely just the following of passion. And what I want to get at is that I believe agape really opens the door in a way that is unlike anything else we have in life. It is a choice. It is an obligation. It is a duty that doesn't kill off passion. It actually opens the door for more passion and deeper passion than we can have through any other means, other than, again, a relationship with God, for which it is only a model. So her definition of love as being just this passionate thing, I think she's right. The piece of paper won't do anything to validate that. And the piece of paper also might threaten to ruin it. She's saying, I'm afraid this because, boy, when you get married, all of a sudden, there's all kinds of big, deep questions. And if all you're looking for is, then, probably don't bring up the big M word, right? But if you want in on what we're really made for, oh, boy, you really need the M word. Why? Because what she's saying, I didn't say this to her, maybe I should have, but when she's saying, I love you, honey, what's she actually saying? She's actually saying, I really deeply like the feelings that I get when I'm with you, and I really desperately want more of those feelings. That's what she means by I love you. I really like what we've got, and I want more of it. See, the problem is that's not a biblical definition of love. A biblical definition of love isn't how much do I like and want more of what I'm getting. A biblical definition of love is how much am I willing to invest in this person, to give to them. So when someone says, I love them, but I don't want to ruin them by getting married, what they're really saying is, I like them a lot, but I don't love them enough to cut off future options. Remember, agape is all about promises of the future. I like a lot what I'm experiencing, but I don't love them enough to cut off future options. I don't love them enough to fully invest myself in this person. So, all of that to say, I really do believe agape opens the door for both passion, for a choice that opens up the possibility of a passion like no other. Now, don't get me wrong. When Hillary and I hold hands now, it's not like when we first held hands. Okay, I remember the first time I was like, and she took my hand, I was like, yeah, right? I mean, it's thrilling. That moment was thrilling in ways that holding hands, it doesn't bring those same butterflies. But that thrill largely had to do with fear. Fear, will she accept this or not? Am I enough of a man for her? Right? Risk and fear infuse adrenaline and infuse excitement because you don't know what's going to happen. And that can create a kind of passionate emotional experience. Because, right? But it's not the best kind of passion. It's not the deepest kind of passion. The best kind of passion and the deepest kind of passion is beyond that point when I'm not afraid of whether or not she's going to take my hand. I know she's going to take my hand. And not only can I give her my hand, I can give her my heart. I can give her my hopes and my fears. I can give her the deep, dark stuff. I can be vulnerable. I can be me. And I can experience what it means to be known and loved. You see, my kids, their highest form of pleasure right now is candy. And it's fun to give them candy and to see them bounce off the walls and laugh and scream and, can I have another one? And, they just, what do you want? If you can have anything you want, candy. That's it. Life does not get better than that. But as we grow, our palates change. And now, I think for most of us, if it's Jolly Rancher or creme brulee, I think many of us would say creme brulee, right? Our tastes change. We want something deeper. We want something richer. And that's how it is with relationship as well. If we want in on what is really meant for our souls to be deeply satisfying and truly enriching, it really comes down to this thing of making a promise. And again, agape is all about saying, this is how I'm gonna be. Not based on how I feel. Remember the romantics, they say, you gotta be free to follow your passions. And their definition of freedom, just like the definition of love was a little bit tweaked, the definition of freedom is the ability to follow whatever whim, whatever passion comes my way. But what they don't understand is that kind of freedom is actually a prison. Because it's not real freedom. Real freedom is the ability to choose who I want to be come hell or high water. Does this make sense? Being free to do whatever I want is actually a prison cell. because it means I have to do whatever I want. Whatever whim comes my way, well, I have to be free, and I don't want to be in the prison cell of, making tough choices, so here I go into freedom, and into the next freedom, and then I'm angry that freedom didn't, produce the joy that I wanted it to, so now I need to be free to be angry. And then I'm free to be, whatever the next thing is. But with each jerk, our world gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until we're just in this collapsing, angst-ridden prison cell of selfish desire. I want what I want and I can't get it! And I just spiral into bitterness and hate and everything else. Real freedom says, I am free to make a choice. And that actually is the most significant part of what it means to be human. I mean, think about it. Who are you? What do you really bring to the table? I mean, you didn't choose your parents, did you? You didn't choose which egg and sperm happened to meet. So what are you, a random biological accident? We didn't choose what era we were born into or what culture, what language we speak. I mean, so much of our life is predetermined. So what are you, just a product of your environment? Oh, yep, I just happened to be born, whenever that was, and to whoever that was. And so that's why I wear the clothes that I wear and speak the language that I... What, is that you? I know some of us are thinking, well, no, I know me. Oh, pick me, Todd. I've got the answer. I'm made by God. That makes me who I am. And I'd say, good. You're sort of there. That's important. And that can help a lot to know that you're made by God. Well, what? Is it just you is it just God and the environment? Like, that's all? Like, it's just God and just the environment. That's what makes me me. No. You bring your choice to the table. Two people born into very similar circumstances with equally wonderful plans that are designed by God for their lives can end up in vastly different circumstances because of the choice that they make. This is who I will be. That's all we have. That's all we are. That's all we bring to the table is who I say I want to be. I could say I want to be a bodybuilder. Right? I'm going to be a bodybuilder! Now, the choice is only part of it. It's the lifestyle that follows. It's the choice coupled with the follow-through to live out that choice. And that's the vow. It's, I am choosing this, and I'm going to follow through with it. If we lose our ability to give our word and keep it, we lose everything. This is why Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And he says, don't swear by anything else because you don't actually have anything else. You can't swear in God's name. You can't swear by Jerusalem. You can't swear by, he lists off all these things that you can't, because you don't own them. You can't control them. The only thing you have is your ability to say what you will do and then do it. And you become more fully who God's made you to be, the more that you rely on God to be who He says He will be and follow through on His word. Just like we're empowered to agape by receiving agape, we're empowered to give our word and keep it the more that we trust God to do that in our life. So if you're thinking, oh man, I've lost all, I don't know who I am because I don't know, I say I'm going to be somewhere at such and such a time, and I have no confidence that I'm going to do that. And I say, I am so sorry for you. Because you don't know what it means to be human. Because that's all you've got. But that's not the end of the story. You can grow in your ability to be a person who can give your word and keep it by trusting God to give His word to you and keep it. He can heal that in you. He can change that in you. He can make you a person of your word. Now, some of us might be sitting here thinking, okay, it's all good, Todd, creme brulee. I like it. It's better than candy. I like the duty. I like the choice, passion. All that sounds great, but I've tried all of that. And it didn't work. I did the commitment, I did the vow, I made the promise, I tried to live it out, and I didn't get the passion. All I got was abused. All I got was dropped. All I got was abandoned. All I got was forgotten. And I just want to speak to those of you for a moment. God understands that in a way that I don't fully, because Hillary's been an amazing spouse for me. But God knows. He committed himself to a people who rejected him again and again and again. There's this verse in Jeremiah 3:8 where he says, ultimately, he got to the point where he rejected them. He divorced them because of the faithfulness, because of the adulteries. Because marriage is not meant to be a blank check for a person to abuse another person. It's meant to be something that brings the best out in both people. And although when we give, we're not supposed to give with any expectation of anything in return, that doesn't mean that God doesn't expect that person to give anything in return. Does that make sense? He's designed marriage to be a mutual relationship of giving and receiving. Both people giving and both people receiving. And he wants to say to you, stop giving because you expect something in return. But he wants to say that to your spouse as well. But the reality is that there are some people in this world who are not givers. They're takers. And they're very difficult to spot, especially in marriage, and especially at the beginning of marriage. Here's why. You have a giver. You have a taker. They get together, and it looks happy. The giver's happy to give, and the taker's happy to take. Does that make sense? This looks like a happy marriage for a while. But eventually the giver gets exhausted and says, this is not working for me. I don't want to only give with the expectation of what I get in return, but frankly, I'm drained, and I've got nothing left. And I don't know what to tell you about when is the time that you get to the spot that God did, where you say, enough is enough. But he did. I'm so sorry for the history of the church that have taken a few words that Jesus said about adultery because he was speaking to adulterers. The Pharisees of that time would marry one young hot thing, and when they got tired of her, they'd divorce her and marry the next young hot thing. And so Jesus was saying, if you're doing that, you're committing adultery. And they wanted to say, well, no, we're not, because we divorced them first. So he's speaking specifically to people who have that as their problem, but he's not. He was not trying to create a new legalism. He's speaking to legalists who are using the Old Testament provision for divorce as a way to commit adultery. Does that make sense? He wasn't trying to say of adultery, now here's the new legalism. Does that make sense? He's trying to combat legalism, not establish it. What God thinks, here's what he says of how he betroths himself to us in Hosea. I believe it's in Hosea. Maybe I put the one in there from Isaiah. There's a bunch of different spots where it talks about it. So I did the one from Isaiah. For your husband is your maker, whose name is the Lord of hosts, and your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel, who is called the God of all the earth. That is not what I had thought that it said. Anyway, there's a passage somewhere that talks about how God's going to betroth us to him. It's probably the other verse in Hosea 2, I think 18. Anyway, there's this verse that says he's going to betroth us to him in compassion, in faithfulness, and in compassion. So I don't know when will God in his compassion say, well done, good and faithful. You've given freely, and I'm telling you, it's enough. Does that make sense? But he will. And he is your first spouse, not this joker. So when he says it's enough, he's the one to release you because he's the one to whom you will ultimately be connected for all eternity. So when he says it's enough, it's enough. So if you're in an unbalanced marriage where there's a taker and there's a giver and you're just thinking, I don't know how long I can survive this, turn to your first spouse and say, how long, O Lord? To what extent is the comfort that you give me and the security that you give me and the affection that you give me and the agape that you give me, to what extent is that supposed to be something that sustains me to continue giving when I'm getting nothing in return? And at what point, O Lord? And I say to you, it is only by his word. He's the only one who can release you, because he's the only one to whom you'll be connected forever. You're not married to me and for eternity. So don't come to me and ask me, can I be divorced? That is between you and God. But I tell you, if you're in an unbalanced marriage where you are being taken from repeatedly in an abusive fashion, either emotionally, physically, or any other way, I will back you up. I will support you, because I believe that's God's heart for you. Let's pray together. Jesus, oh man. I thank you that you're so committed to us. Thank you that you're so loyal to us. Thank you that you're so devoted to us. You consider that your primary obligation. You bind yourself to us. You say you will never leave us or forsake us. Lord, thank you that that obligation, that duty doesn't steal away the affection, the passion, the joy, the romance, so to speak, of our relationship. But Lord, it really opens the door for it to be all that you intended for it to be. Lord, I pray for everyone in our church family who has come under that lie of duty in relationship, as if that would satisfy you, glorify you, or really be your intent for our life, that we would just be in loveless legalism. Jesus, I pray for healing. I pray for hope. I pray, Lord, that this truth that you're speaking, that you want us to be passionately in love with those we're connected to. Not necessarily with the butterflies of excitement, but Lord, with the depth of the knowledge that we've been known and loved in the good times, but also in the bad. At our best, whatever that is, but also at our worst, and we're very familiar with what that is. Lord, thank you so much that you give people to us who can love us through all of that, not just in marriage, but Lord, for all of us. Single, married, divorced, widowed, all of us, no matter what our situations are, you've set us in the midst of a family that is called to be and live out agape, to be unconditional in our affection, in our support, in our knowledge, and in our acceptance of one another. Never to reject one another because of anything that is said or done, but always to be loving, accepting, forgiving, because that's what you've done for us. Lord, help us to be more of the family that you've designed us to be, and help us to grow in the marriages that you've designed us to enjoy, to live out, and ultimately to model the kind of love that you have for a lost and dying world. We love you, Jesus, and we praise you. In your name we say, amen. All right, everyone, thank you so much. Love ya. See you around.